Welcome back to another Explainer. Today, we're diving into what I think is literally one of the most fascinating paradoxes in modern pop culture. We're looking at a title that, honestly, for over a decade, has been a massive, massive sore spot for comic book fans. Brand New Day. But here's the wild part. Somehow, this exact title is now attached to one of the most hotly anticipated cinematic releases of the decade. So how on earth did we get here? Well, we're going to unpack the editorial mechanics, the narrative shifts, and all the fascinating history to figure out exactly what happened.
Right off the bat, posing this question creates some serious cognitive dissonance, especially if you were hanging around the comic book scene back in 2008. Marvel Studios and Columbia Pictures are gearing up to release the 38th film in the Marvel Cinematic Universe on July 31, 2026, and they've deliberately chosen the title associated with arguably their biggest historical controversy. You've got to ask yourself, why? Why would a massive studio intentionally evoke the memory of an era that famously alienated so many of its core readers?
To really grasp this cinematic gamble, we have to rewind and look at the intense, and I mean intense, fan backlash. Take a look at this archived Reddit comment. It perfectly captures the brutal response from the community at the time. Readers were absolutely furious. They were organizing boycotts, actively dropping the title from their pull lists at local comic shops. It was wild. From a purely business point of view, this comic book event was supposed to be a fresh jumping-on point to boost readership. But instead, it effectively alienated a massive chunk of their existing audience. People felt like the publisher was prioritizing a superficial, flashy reboot over actual, genuine narrative integrity.
So, to give you some context on exactly why fans were so up in arms, let's track the timeline real quick. Back in 1987, Peter Parker married Mary Jane Watson. This was a massive, beloved milestone in his character's life. But fast forward 20 years to 2007, and we get the One More Day storyline. Basically, Aunt May is dying, and Peter makes a literal deal with a demon, Mephisto, to save her life. The catch? The retroactive erasure of his marriage to Mary Jane. This supernatural retcon instantly wiped away 2 whole decades of character growth, dropping Peter right into the 2008 Brand New Day soft reboot where, boom, he's suddenly single, struggling, and anonymous all over again.
And this number brilliantly illustrates the exact cost of that editorial decision. $66,586. That was the average monthly comic circulation during the Brand New Day era. To put that into perspective for you, before the marriage was erased, Spider-Man comics were consistently selling over 100,000 copies every single month. This dramatic, nearly 30% drop perfectly quantifies the sheer scale of the backlash. Fans didn't just complain, they just walked away. Let's break down these two eras side by side to really see the contrast. The editorial mandate behind this huge change came directly from then editor-in-chief Joe Quesada. His thought process was that a married Peter Parker was just uninteresting, or maybe less relatable to a broader, younger audience. He wanted a single Peter with a secret identity, totally unburdened by matrimony. But, as those sales numbers clearly show, that mandate completely backfired. Instead of drawing in this hypothetical new wave of readers, it just drove away the core audience. These were the people who had invested heavily, for years, in Peter's narrative progression into adulthood.
So, the absolutely crucial takeaway here is this. The core structural problem of the 2008 comics wasn't necessarily just that Peter was single again. It was how they made him single. Fans felt that by using a literal demonic deal to save Aunt May, Peter was essentially just dodging personal responsibility. Instead of confronting mortality and making the incredibly hard, mature choices that actually define a true hero, the reset felt like, well, a contrived editorial cheat code. It sacrificed deep thematic elements, like consequence, like real sacrifice, just for pure shock value and a lighter, more episodic tone. Now, what's really interesting about this is how the upcoming 2026 film completely flips the script and solves this massive structural flaw. Think about it. The cinematic universe also needed to get Peter back to his street-level anonymous roots. But instead of some selfish Faustian bargain with a demon, the MCU actually achieved this reset at the end of Spider-Man No Way Home through a truly selfless sacrifice. Peter literally allowed Doctor Strange to cast a memory spell, erasing his entire existence from the world just to save the multiverse. It's the exact same endpoint, right? An isolated, anonymous Peter. But this time, it's built on a rock-solid foundation of profound character maturity and real consequences, rather than just magically evading grief. Which brings us to the first part of our breakdown, the cinematic reset. The new film is directed by Destin Daniel Cretton and written by returning MCU veterans Chris McKenna and Eric Summers, along with Justin Kuritzkis, and they have assembled an absolute powerhouse cast that really highlights this gritty new direction. Obviously, Tom Holland, Zendaya, and Jacob Batalon are back, but the additions, they are staggering. We've got John Bernthal returning as the Punisher. Holland has actually mentioned that Peter and Frank Castle developed this intense big brother-little brother rivalry, constantly clashing over their radically different methods of fighting crime. Plus, Mark Ruffalo is returning as Bruce Banner, who, interestingly enough, is now working as a quantum mechanics professor at Empire State University.
The producers have made it very clear that their main goal here is to show Peter as a proper Spider-Man for the very first time on film. Taking a major cue from the most successful bits of that 2008 comic run, the movie strips away all the cosmic multiverse-ending stakes and the fancy Avengers tech. It completely isolates Peter. It brings him right back down to the pavement as a grounded, gritty, entirely anonymous protector of New York City, a guy who is dedicating his absolute entire existence to the mask. And because he's down on the streets, Peter's facing a terrifying new gauntlet of heavy-hitting, organized crime. Michael Mando is finally returning as the Scorpion, teaming up with Marvin Jones III as Tombstone. We've also got the terrifying ninja organization The Hand, led by Fan Xiaoshuang, not to mention Boomerang and Tarantula in the mix. Oh, and if all of that wasn't enough to deal with, Peter is constantly having to dodge the heavily regulated Department of Damage Control, run by Bill Metzger, played by Tremel Tillman. It is a wildly high-pressure, incredibly dangerous environment for him to be in.
All right, let's shift gears and talk about evolving powers and allies.
You see, this narrative isn't just about Peter punching street mobsters. It's really about the dangerous physical and psychological toll of wearing the mask full-time. Tom Holland actually pitched this brilliant idea for Peter's evolution. It goes like this. Step 1, Peter's an anonymous vigilante operating under intense, unrelenting pressure with absolutely zero support system. Step 2, all this stress triggers a frightening physical change. His eyes actually turn completely black as he temporarily loses control and becomes highly aggressive. And Step 3, and this is a massive nod to the Tobey Maguire era, he develops the ability to generate organic webs directly from his wrists. His body is literally mutating to adapt to the sheer trauma of his isolation. How crazy is that?
And that intense emotional isolation is just maximized when you look at what's happening to the people he loves. MJ is off at MIT and actually has a new boyfriend, which, as you can imagine, creates some incredibly conflicting, painful feelings for Peter. Ned, totally oblivious to Peter's true identity now, has ironically created a Spidey tracker app just to try and find Spider-Man so he can thank him for saving them back in high school. And even Peter's new mentor figure, Bruce Banner, is struggling big time. His smart Hulk persona is rapidly breaking down, and he is regressing right back into the uncontrollable, rage-filled Savage Hulk. Literally everyone Peter cares about is either moving on without him or completely spiraling out of control.
Which brings us to the ultimate takeaway of this whole explainer. This 2026 film is essentially a narrative synthesis designed to break the cycle of franchise volatility. It is attempting to redeem the incredibly divisive 2008 comic era by doing exactly what the comics failed to do back then. It keeps the grounded, street-level focus, it keeps the engaging new villains, but it anchors all of that in a deeply character-driven search for identity. It takes all the pain and the controversy of the Brand New Day setup and actually makes it mean something profound about Peter's painful transition into true adulthood.
So, I'm going to leave you with this final thought to ponder as we start counting down the days to July 2026. Will Spider-Man Brand New Day successfully redeem Marvel's biggest historical comic mistake by transforming it into a cinematic masterpiece of character growth, or by invoking this incredibly controversial title, is history just doomed to repeat itself? It's a massive gamble for the studio, and honestly, I for one absolutely cannot wait to see how it all pays off. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and as always, keep questioning the narrative.